This is my conversation with prominent YouTuber, Irish storyteller, and Nietzschean Uberboyo. We talk about the moral revolutionaries in the West through the frame of Christianity versus Nietzscheanism, and how our moral systems and our moral intuitions guide people's opinions on politics and their own culture. Before the conversation starts, I do have to apologize for the audio quality. There are some parts where it's a bit echoey or there's a bit of a reverb. I tried to correct it as much as I could, but unfortunately we are filming in a brand new facility and the equipment setup was not configured quite properly. I will say, however, that the conversation is worth every minute, and I would encourage you to listen through the whole thing and get past the little bits of audio that aren't quite right. With that being said, thank you for listening to Hacking State. I give you Uberboyo.
There you go. So we have to kind of do talk show mode where we're like half towards
we're like facing each other at a 45-degree angle. All right. Welcome to the Hacking State podcast.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. So for those who don't know, this is Uberboyo. He's a prominent YouTuber.
Yeah, wow.
And
the fancy labels, yeah.
May I say even a philosopher of
sorts? Oh dear. Oh, I'm not sure.
I might say that. So we're going to talk today about Christianity and Nietzscheanism.
This is it.
So you're a Nietzschean, and this conversation came about because of a private conversation we were having related to, whether there can be any kind of Christian Nietzschean synthesis. And for those who watch the show, some of you will know that I interviewed Zero HP Lovecraft a little while back to talk to him about a piece that he wrote. I think it was literally called Christian Nietzschean Synthesis, in which he sort of went through and described his version of sort of how you could make these two ideological positions more compatible. And so I thought I'd take the opportunity to ask you a little bit about your views on this. And to start, let's just say, you describe yourself as a Nietzschean. What does that mean to you, and how did you get there?
That's a good question, because people very quickly turn Nietzsche into an ideology, as I'm sure you've seen many people come before. But this is cooking out to the whole Buddhist way of thinking. But he is obviously a methodology of thinking. Nietzsche is giving you procedures and ways and frames of reference to think. He is obviously a philosopher asking you to use your own brain. The kind of meme of you must learn to critically think is genuinely what Nietzsche is trying to teach you to do.
Yeah.
So to abstract out of that like a sophisticated ideology, he certainly has his perspectives. But I think you can take what he does and move on from that. And I actually think there's some holes in Nietzsche that perhaps we'll get into later that he couldn't have seen himself, that really been able to form anything solid out of him. So to be a Nietzschean, I think, is to be able to think in a certain way. And that way of thinking is obviously the question of morality. I think the core of Nietzsche is the moral question. And people often say to me, they're like, why do you bang on about this German fucking incel all the time? And I'm like, listen, there's a point. There's a reason.
I hate when they bring up that insult. Like,
oh man, it's
to denounce the flaw. I have a friend who did that, who had a tweet that went viral where he was like, "Oh, why would you ever take advice from an incel like him?" And it's so ridiculous, and it's so ahistorical. Nietzsche obviously had a huge impact on society, both in his time, but especially in the early 20th century. It's completely undeniable.
If we're going to get into the rationale of this, like the idea of calling Nietzsche an incel, therefore he's invalid, is retarded, because every single priest in the Catholic Church is an incel then.
Sure.
It's like, are we just not listening to people who are incels? Like that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But more specifically, of course, it is obviously the attempt to just dismiss something that's too complicated to understand, or too difficult to understand, or too challenging. But I don't know. I've gotten in trouble with this, by the way, for a lot of the right wing, but I would make fun of Nietzsche every now and again, because he did live a funny life. He was a very extreme character. He was a sort of wandering incel in the mountains in some ways, but there's obviously an awful lot more to him. I don't say it out of hate. I say it out of maybe a little bit of love for the guy. But a lot of people do. They do it. They use it to psychologically dismiss him and be like, I don't want to deal with this. And this is precisely because the stakes of what he is asking, because I say the word morality. he is a moral revolutionary. He's actually a classic moral philosopher who asks the simple, basic philosophical questions: what is right and wrong to do? And these are really big questions. And you and maybe many other people might say, like, why is this relevant to our lives? Do I want to like entertain? If I'm going to do philosophy, do I want to spend my time entertaining, like, the train and question where it's like, do you pull the lever?
The moral dilemma.
The moral dilemma. But that's not like, this is very, very practical when you think about it, because what did we just go through in the last 10 years with the woke revolution? That was a moral revolution. That was the experience of a reevaluation of Western Christian morality, where you have a lot of these woke tards show up and they say, atheism is good, Christianity is evil, the white race is evil. They invert the morality of the West and take everything that is good and everything that we would say is our identity and transform that into evil and bad, and say that everything that is outside of our identity, such as being homosexual, being a minority, being anything that's transsexual, whatever it is, anything that's different is moral and has a pedestal that must be raised up. And this is a classic Nietzschean reevaluation of morals. You could even say it's a slave revolt in morality, as you might say.
Yeah. So I was going to say that, like, the criticism from a lot of sort of, Nietzschean or other kinds of pagan thinkers is that wokeness only succeeds because they basically take the Christian playbook.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree.
It.
I don't necessarily agree with that, but yes, I think it's like the origin of this discussion that we're on now is, you're saying, like, why is Nietzsche relevant? What does it mean to be a Nietzschean? I think to be a Nietzschean is to be able to be conscious and aware of this phenomenon, where morality can be very perspective dependent and it can be very politicized, and it's very difficult to figure out what you might say is an objective morality, this type of thing. So when you see something like the woke movement, you're able to observe it and notice that this is a moral revolution taking place, and these people are projecting racism or atheism as abstract, perfect moral like principles. But this is not what's taking place at all. This is like a sort of resentment slave movement. And yet, like, you could argue, I've actually also got in trouble with the right for saying Christianity was the woke movement of Rome. But not for those, like, and this is where it becomes so fascinating, because the Christians have a really good point where they say, wait a second, when I look at my reality, I'm Christian, I'm conservative, I'm right wing, and I'm getting attacked by these woke people who are Satanist, anti-Christian, atheist, cutting off their dicks. It's like they are obviously our enemy, and we're obviously the based right-wing Christians and all this. This is what's so fascinating. If you go back 2,000 years, you see those same demographics form, but the Christians were on this side, and you might say the right-wing pagans were on this side.
Right.
So it's very interesting, because you can't really see that unless you take a Nietzschean view on things, understanding that morality can be very demographically predicated.
Right. Okay. So you're making the case for Nietzsche as a moralist, right? Which is sort of like the focus on, works like Genealogy of Morals or Beyond Good and Evil, where he sort of, part of his life project was sort of an anti-Christian, or at least anti-clerical, undertaking, right? Which is like this. There's been this slave morality. There's been this slave revolt in morals. And this has led the West on this 2,000-year arc of Christian, hegemony. And now Nietzsche's, by my understanding of his work and as well as some others, Nietzsche's making the case that he wants to, draw upon the sort of pre-Christian aristocratic warrior values, which are very different, which aren't just generically pagan, but actually have their own sort of hierarchy and moral system to them. And, give the opportunity for this transvaluation that he wants to have happen. So where does that leave us now? Right? If we acknowledge that, okay, so if I take your framing that Nietzscheanism is not an ideology, which I agree with, and that it's really more of a methodology, right? In which case it's closer to something like the scientific method, which is interesting because he also had a lot of criticism of scientism. But then how does this better equip us to sort of move forward, given the death of God, given the sort of woke or maybe post-woke environment that we're moving into?
Yeah, well, this is the thing, is that a lot of us got steamrolled, because there's so much has changed actually in the last like year and a half.
Yeah.
But in the last like 5 years, a lot of us woke up to the fact that there was something rotten in the state of Denmark. And like we call it the woke movement in passing, but that's not necessarily correct. It has been like an enormous psychological trend that's actually been in place almost 200 years, that's been playing itself out. I'll get into like many aspects of this. But fundamentally, what happened about 4 or 5 years ago was we realized that the Western culture is going in a like extremely hardcore downwards death spiral, and the moral principles that were getting enforced in laws, because this stuff can sound like philosophical garbling, but the thing is that it's not. The morality informs everything. Morality informs even things as big as like where investments go. Morality, like for example, the morality of saving the planet for climate change is what Elon Musk hinged onto to build like Tesla in order to turn himself into like one of the richest people in the world. Morality dictates where money can flow. Morality dictates illegality. It dictates what is right and wrong. It dictates what judges decide in order to enforce. It dictates the transformation of the entire culture. So we live in this sort of 1960s liberal, I guess you could say, civil rights morality, which is the foundation of the woke in many ways. And this seemed like a good thing to our boomer parents and to most of us as well, growing up for most of our lives. And then in the last 10 years, we've started to see the fruits of that come to pass. And obviously the internet has red-pilled many people as well.
Yeah.
And you start to realize that the moral first principles that like almost everybody around us holds are wrong. They're bad. They're self-destructive. They're self-denying in many ways. And so what you're almost experiencing is a large amount of people. Now it's almost like the Western people are infected with immorality that is teaching them to essentially cook themselves in every level and destroy themselves. And this is the scary thing. It's a self-hating, self-defeating morality. There's anti-life, anti-health, anti-future, anti-possibility. And our generation is almost at the vanguard trying to go against this, which is like fighting against a religion. It's that big in its scope and this big in its seriousness, because if you fight against it in America, you got your life destroyed over the last 10 years. In England, still, you fight it. In the UK, you're going to go to prison. People go to prison for hate speech. In Europe, it's the same thing. So like you're in this moral problem where they're enforcing with laws their religious moral views, if you will, with your religious sentiment of an ideology. And you need to say to yourself, well, I know that's wrong. But then you have the second problem, which is like, well, what is right? What is the direction I'm trying to go? What is the moral things that I'm going to enforce? And this is a big problem the right wing are having right now, where we feel the woke is bad, but we try to move towards what we call right wing, which is turned into like a sort of a positive signifier at the, like, you know, you're very right wing. That's great. But like a lot of the right wing has no head. They're headless chickens. They don't know what they're doing because they've got no moral direction. You've got the people who are banging on about the woke right, for example, showing that these people want to go to the same liberal morality from the 1990s. They just don't like the extremes of the woke. But that's not a moral revolution at all. That's just trying to like reverse the page. And you've heard that before, but it is a very true phenomenon. You see people who are trying to go back to Christianity. And I think these people obviously tend to be more healthy and more right-wing, if you will. But you do have that question. It's like, is Christianity really the moral revolution that is necessary? Maybe it's causing part of the problem. So these are big issues. And then you obviously have people in the more extreme right that are like, no, we need to go further than anything most people are even ready to entertain yet. And that's pushing morality far beyond 1960s civil rights, maybe past the 200 years ago, past the Enlightenment, to something even more hardcore than that. And that would be like, you know, the hard right version of Nietzsche, if you so will. So these are all fascinating questions. And this is actually what we're living through. We're watching this happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can appreciate this divergence in the right. And, you know, I've noticed that too. Obviously, there's an unholy alliance, right, against the left, against the sort of progressivism, global left, woke, whatever you want to call it, right? But you know, there were factions within the right that are not even on the same metaphysical foundation.
Oh yeah,
and I think that's actually kind of the root of the disagreement, is that there's not a clear alternative metaphysical foundation. And so even if I say, oh well, Christianity got us in this mess, we're not going to get out of it by returning to Christian morals. because the movement that we're in now is sort of the logical end state of these Christian morals, removed from God. I think the difficulty with that position is that it's like, well, replace that with what? Replace that with what? You can have the sort of Alcibiades might makes right kind of jockeying, that sort of that is kind of the naive vitalist position, right? Which is like, just make yourself as strong as possible, and who cares? Those who don't figure it out are going to get left behind. And take power and do what you can. That's a position that you can argue for on a rational basis for an individual, but it's very difficult to actually build a real movement around that, or to build anything that doesn't sound extremely antisocial around it.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this vacuum in metaphysics. If you're saying that there needs to be a moral revolution, right, or a moral counter-revolution, how do you do that without a metaphysical underpinning?
I actually, this is a dodge of the question in many ways, but I think this is another weakness of the right. I think a lot of this stuff is a psychological question. Because if you talk about a moral revolution, you're in some sense talking of a psychological revolution, which rewires how you think about your mind. So take, for example, the paradigm we live in now. And what would it mean to go back to the end of the French Revolution, pre-French Revolution? And that would involve a dismantling of almost every first principle that holds our culture together, And you think about the whole sphere of how we label the concepts inside of our heads. We think to ourselves, if we have like a mental illness, if we have some type of problem, we will describe it with some psychological term that we picked up off a psychoanalyst or something like this. You go back to like Catholicism of the 17th century or 16th century, 15th century, they would obviously label that a demon. You think of like the whole structure of how you would deal with mental problems. You would go into confession and you would sit on the psychoanalyst chair in the confessional booth and deal with a priest. And they had this enormous authority that structured their reality. They had this giant institution in the church, and they would harvest people into it and control their minds through this. And then on top of this, they would also mandate authority. They would mandate that the kings had the divine right of kings, and the church would be like the mind control operation that would do this, and they would deal with like people's pains and problems, and they would world model them and all this. Now, all of that stuff has fallen apart, and what we see in its place is the arrival of the categorizations of mental illness. The authoritarian personality is the perfect example of this. If you want to have a family and you want to command your wife around, you're obviously mentally ill. You've got a fascism inside of your head. If you are racist, racism is obviously a sign of like deep hate, deep disgust, and incel energy that you project upon the world. The incel concept as well. The desire to control people is a sign of darkness and evil inside of your heart. And these are all psychological concepts that you place upon people. Then the media acts as the new church, which in a sense mandates authority and the divine right of kings to whoever is in power nowadays, this type of thing. And this is in some sense a practical thing. You'd need to have like institutions like the media functioning and in your possession in order to mandate authority. The internet actually can't really mandate authority because it's not centralized in that way to be able to do that. And then also on top of this, the transformation of our psychological concepts. Like we'd have to let go of many of our beliefs about what racism is, what hate is, what love is, who we are, and how relations work. What is like, is it right to be mean to people? Like all of this stuff would have to reform and change. And even like mental illness would have to reform and change in order to truly have a proper comprehensive worldview revolution to see something like that happening. And that's a big problem, because like it's far beyond something as simple as politics, if you so will. Like just getting some guy in power, that would obviously be the start of it. But this is like a comprehensive transformation of institutions like psychology, education, all of this type of thing. So seeing that shift would be a big deal. And how does that work? Is that like a thing where you look at how the psychological paradigm we live in was constructed? You had like the Frankfurt School, you had like Freudianism, you had all these guys working for 100 years to enforce their moral worldview and their perspective and their habits and their institutions, which are very atheist, that strip out God. You need to see all of that like all of that work done in the opposite direction for maybe 50 years or so or something like this to really get that stuff put together as like a firm institution that can hold together a society. So it's a big question. That's a lot of work, you know?
Well, so that was a little bit of a dodge because you've outlined the gravity of the problem, right? And I guess we're getting closer to maybe what is the heart of this discussion, which is, well, the Christian answer to this is, why not just return to God?
Yeah.
Like, the answers are there. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to try to come up with an inorganic version of what was really an evolved religious process. We have the works, we have the books, we have the gospels. They have instructions on how to live and what to do right. And you could say, well, Christianity is, it's too soft. Christianity is cucked, whatever. But, the hardcore Christians, I know many Catholics and I recently met some Greek Orthodox, and, there are sects of Christianity that believe that they still have it in them to sort of, present something that's tough and strong and discerning and is not weak. It doesn't just give in to the whims of identity politics or special interest groups or whatever it may be. They're coming to you with a tailored solution, with a solution that says, hey, this worked before. Why spend the next 50, 100 years, trying to reinvent something from scratch?
So the way I would look at this is that the concept of God seems to change significantly depending on the health and state of the demographic that is producing it. And this is a very, very big problem. This is actually in Nietzsche's criticism of Christianity and the Antichrist. It's a very, very big problem for what an awful lot of the assertions of Christians are. Because, first of all, as the church is right now, as much as people promise that it's going to be based and solve all problems, it's not there at all. I've done the whole go to the church thing. I've been to the church, Catholic Irish, and I went to the church. I did it during COVID several times because I was looking for something that was like resistant to the modern forces, and it just wasn't there. They just don't have that thumos of that will. And I went into church Christmas 2022, I think 2021, and the guy was telling me I was in a small rural town of like 40 farmers, and the priest was saying, like, I just went to China. China's so amazing. It's so good to be among like diverse foreigners. We need to. There's a town down the road, and they're 2/3 been brought in. 2/3 of their population are refugees.
Yeah,
we need to do that here. So there's also like this group, the Knights of Colombo, which are an amazing group. I really, really like them, and I like the type of operation they do. And there's also a chance that the youth get in now who have been radicalized by TikTok, and they'll actually reform a lot of these institutions, like the Catholic Church and maybe the Knights of Columbus. But the Knights of Columbus is like, openly promoting how much it's supporting refugees coming into America and stuff like this. And this is a problem because an awful lot of the institutions, like as much as people say, are the Jews doing the refugee crisis, they do some of it. You have the I think it's the Hebrews for immigrants thing. That's a real institution.
well, as well as a bunch of Catholic charities.
But that's it. There's like loads of Catholics that are doing this too.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you're saying, all right, we want to build a new set of principles, it's like the Catholics are going to have to do that as well. Like it is actually a warn when no matter which direction you go. Yeah. And that's a big problem. And then this is the kind of brings it back to the metaphysical question, because you say, well, we'll take the God principle. But the God principle is not fucking straightforward, because God psychologically morphs depending on the state of the soul that's trying to interface with it. So Nietzsche observes this in the Antichrist. He points out that the ancient God of Israel of the Old Testament, who is famous for being a dickhead, you have Richard Dawkins, who says like, hey, that old God of the old Bible, you're so merciless and jealous.
Wrathful and vengeful,
yeah.
Jealous.
And he's saying he's a dickhead, right? But Nietzsche looks at this, and obviously before Dawkins was around, Nietzsche looks at this and says, the God of the Old Testament is based. The God of the Old Testament is healthy. He's a nationalist God. He represents a people who are full of willed power. And this is obviously the story of the Jews. The Israelites begin out full of willed power. They're a mighty, conquering, pastoralist people. Moses mandates them, Joshua, the super leader, come down and they conquer Jericho. It's badass. They're like pioneers. And they're like the Americans coming over here, And then they get their culture. And then what happens? They create their urban society. They create Israel. They get decadent. They bring in all the gold. And then they start to get weak. And they turn into libtards. They start to develop a different form of God. And this is what Nietzsche observes. God morphs as we go through the history of the Israelites. So you start off with this nationalist who says, you're my chosen people. I hate everybody else. I am closed-minded. You destroy Jericho. You can kill children. You can kill ghosts if you want. I'm a bad man because I'm here to create the promised land for you. And this is our project. And I'm a nationalist, this, that, the thing. So that's a strong God image. But then what happens is we get the fall of Israel. We get the Israelites becoming decadent like we have. And God begins to change significantly. He becomes a God of love, no longer a God of power. He becomes an abstract God of love who is universal. He's open to all people. He's no longer a nationalist. He no longer even has a chosen people anymore. He says, I am for all people. Right. He becomes Gnostic. This is a big problem with early Christianity. It's a very Gnostic movement in many ways. It, in some sense, abstracts away from life itself, because if you engage with life, it seems like, as Nietzsche would say, you become a life-affirming national fighter for your people, your tribe. And then as you maybe become softer, you become, the weak man creating hard times, your idea of this life, you become disgusted with it. You become like an atheist or a liberal. You're like, the natural world and its instincts that it puts inside of us make us evil, make us bad. So what happens is God becomes the God of the other world, the hidden God, the God who actually created this, the God who doesn't like this reality because a demiurge created this reality. And the demiurge wants you to be a nationalist. The demiurge wants you to be like the Pharisees or the Romans, to engage with this world. And instead, the God of love wants you to escape this reality, escape the heaviness of nationalism, racism, health, life, fighting, sex, these type of things. And wants you to delete out of this reality and float off into heaven to this other world, this kingdom of heaven in the skies that has been put out there. And you see this psychology come up over and over again, which is the desire to escape the heaviness of life, which when you're healthy and strong, you turn into power. And this is what's interesting is like, both of these can be godly. You can have the Israelites who are worldly, life-affirming nationalists, and they are extremely godly. And then you can have the Gnostic Christians and the Jews in Babylon who are otherworldly, almost like escaping Gnostics. And they are as pious as you could ever imagine. They're like, love is the highest morality in the world. And I will fight Romans to establish this God of love. But these are completely different moral paradigms, despite both of them have the same metaphysics.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem. And that's what you're seeing now. So people say, let's go back to Christianity. And it's like, what version? How, like, a network of 1,000 based right-wingers are telling us that they're going to overpower the Catholic Church, and it's nearly 1 billion people from Africa and Indonesia and Latin America, and install the Old Testament God in the face of the universal God of love, which is the sort of standard as it is. And these are really difficult problems, and they're very psychologically loaded. And it's almost like the psychology colors our capacity to even interface with the metaphysics. So I've done a very big rant there, please.
Well. So, yeah, that is a lot. I think the what I'm hearing here is like, what do you mean by God, right? And is always the retort. And when you start talking about this moral change being fundamentally an internal sort of psychological change, and you talked briefly about the God of the Old Testament, but I was thinking about the Greek pantheon, especially because if you think about the Greek pantheon or the early Roman gods, right? A lot of these cities, there were gods of the city, right? So Piraeus has a god, and Athens, and Sparta, and they all have their own individual deities, right? And there's some overlap, and it's not as if they're completely exclusive. But one of the interesting things about uh this version of polytheism is that the gods all had very, very animated characters, right? And they manifested certain parts of human nature that were then made they were made exponents of, right? So you've got like Mars, the god of war, you've got Aphrodite, you've got Apollo, you've got whatever, right? Each one of these gods is a combination of traits that are really a reflection of the human being. And by having some sort of cosmology that interacts with them, maybe you get a better understanding about yourself, right? About your own vengefulness, about your own wrathfulness, about your own capacity for hate or for fear or for lust, right? These things that Christianity sort of groups into, the bucket of sin are actually given more range and more definition by having this polytheistic view. You can actually what I'm trying to say is maybe you can understand if we're trying to do a revolution in moral psychology, maybe you understand yourself better um, by acknowledging and accepting those parts of you rather than doing this self-denying process.
Well, again, a slight dodge to the question, but I think it illustrates a kind of aspect of this that's important. If you look at the New Testament God, he has a sterile way of interfacing with reality compared to the Old Testament God, who's like very kind of active. And he's like, he's a dickhead. He's like, as Dawkins says, he's like, go kill those people.
Yeah.
He is jealous. He is nasty, but he acts like a pagan. The Old Testament God acts like Zeus. Zeus is like an individual. Zeus is horny. Zeus is tyrannical. Zeus is nasty. And this is what is happening here is psychologically, because these people, like the Greeks, are engaging with life, they form the natural life archetype and pattern. Just like the Israelites and the Greeks and the Romans and the Germans, they have to engage with this reality. And this naturally forces them to develop a nationalist conception of God, a self-interested tribal conception of God, where they project their self-image out into reality and out into metaphysics and out into space. So for this reason, God always takes on the image of the people who are being God. And the idea that each person is the chosen race of God, that's the most natural, normal way of conceptualizing themselves. The idea that the Jews are the only chosen race is completely wrong. Every single race believes they're the chosen race, and that's the natural archetype you see. So, for example, the Black Israelites are doing a healthy thing where they're saying like Jesus was black and God chose us black people and everybody else is in a conspiracy. That's actually normal to do this. Just like when us right-wingers, you'll meet a lot of Christians and they'll say stuff like, yeah, well, the Europeans all were the lost tribes of Israel. We all came from Israel. And all of us Europeans are actually the Israelites. And the Jews are imposters and the black people are Ham and all this. And that's actually healthy. Even though it's not true, it's healthy because that's what you're trying to do is you're trying to take Jesus and say Jesus wasn't a dude from Middle East. He wasn't a Lebanese man. Jesus had blonde hair and blue eyes. This is the natural tendency for us to project ourselves, because what does life want to do? It wants to take on this world, eat animals, eat the other things, kill the other tribes, and then progenerate itself. And this is the will to power, if you so will. It's this desire to expand and amorph itself. And this is the thing with Christianity, is that like as much as Christians say this is Satanism, this is evil, this is exactly what Christians do. Christians always take their version of this religion and project themselves into it. Catholics and Protestants in Ireland, I know this intimately, form race tribes based on religion and fight each other based on religion. And the Catholics say, we're the holy people who stayed connected to the true church, and Protestants are heretics. The Protestants would say the Catholics are obviously Untermensch, and we have the true religion that we broke free from all this papism. They're controlled by their evil high priest in above. So paganism, life religions, these are really, really important. And what happens then when you get this very strange phenomenon where people maybe urbanize too much, they become you could say soft, perhaps. Maybe they become a race of slaves for like tragedy befalls them. They actually tend to generate a vision of God that is psychologically sterile. He's not as animated. He tends to drift off into heaven. He doesn't become as present. And this is because he can't engage with life. He's not like a pagan. He's not active in this world anymore because he doesn't have any power. And you see this, for example, in Christianity. So Judaism in Babylon develops these traits where the old God Yahweh stops being a badass like Zeus and starts to become this promiser of the promised land far off into distance. This is the God of the Jews, the revolution of morals that Nietzsche points out. Christianity just takes that to a further intense conclusion, develops into Gnostic Christianity. And then you even see it in atheism now. The same concepts in like woke atheism is that, the animated God of Western culture, which was Christian, but it's the race tribe of Western culture, the animated spirit of the West that expanded out into the world and decided it was going to come and kill the Mexicans and force them to become Christian. That guy, that God, he's evil. And that race tribe that thought themselves as chosen by the Christian God of the world, they're evil too, and we're good. And our God might not, like, we don't even worship God, we worship love.
We worship ideals, like
we worship it, but that's it's the same psychological
quality and human rights.
It's the same psychological pattern.
Inclusion.
Exactly. It's this, and often these people actually will be religious, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
They will say stuff, but they will slip stuff in. They'll say stuff like, the universe believes in love. The universe loves me, or I believe in cosmic love, these type of things. So they'll have metaphysical frameworks to make sense of what their mind is going through. But it is obviously, so it's following these same patterns, but it is obviously, the main thing they're doing is going against that life nationalist, life affirming, ruthless way of following God, this type of framework. So I'm not sure if that dodges the question, but...
Well, I have a few more things. So one, I want to get into whether there is any compatibility at all with Christianity. That was sort of the basis or the premise of our discussion, really.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that. So let's start there. Do you see, you said some nice things about the Knights of Columbus, and obviously there are a lot of Christians who, at least culturally, politically, would agree with a lot of the things that you would like to see. Is there space for them? Do they have something to contribute? Do you see there being any kind of mutual understanding between the sort of Nietzscheanism that you're describing and the Christian?
Yes, so absolutely. Nietzscheanism is not something that you can just offer to people and walk them into some type of thing that's going to make their life better.
Yeah.
It's like, it actually turns you into an autist that thinks about this stuff too much. The reason why Christianity sells so well is because it is very healthy for someone to believe in God. Actually, maybe the best way for me to describe this is to actually go into some neuroscience that actually grounds an awful lot of what I'm saying. Because the big problem with this is it can become very speculative. You're talking about, like, here's my opinion on things, and it's like, well, who cares about that? Is there any way we can bring it down into like measurable stuff? One of the best ways you can do the realm of ideas is by measuring brain chemistry, if it's possible. So there's a very famous study, or maybe it should be more famous, from 2015, repeated again in like 2022 a few times, I think, where they took magnets to suppress the part of people's brain that generates belief in God. And now, just to color this
with magnets,
so electromagnetic stimulation. So to illustrate this for yourself and for the audience, this is a very powerful technology. Like, I can get electromagnetic stimulation, and I can like put it on this part of your brain here on the left side, which you call your Broca's area, and it will shoot in a load of electromagnetic force, which will turn it off for 3 hours. It's like if I got an anesthetic and put it in a muscle.
Yeah.
And so what would happen is, like, you won't be able to lift your arm. Yeah, I'd be like, shake hands, and you're like, because it would be off for 3 hours, and then it would just come back online. Just like an anesthetic will put you asleep and you come back online. So you can do this with electromagnetic waves to parts of your brain, and they'll turn off. So I do it to your Broca's area, which is your speech center, and you won't be able to talk. You'll be completely normal otherwise. You'll be like, I can do it to your Wernicke's area, and you can't read. The Wernicke's area is behind your ear, Broca's area is up front. So this is a very powerful technology. And they did this to a part of your brain called the posterior medial frontal cortex right here.
Yeah.
And the effects they saw was that when they suppressed this part of your brain, people became more atheist. So they stopped believing in God, became more atheist. And they also became more open to foreigners and strangers, meaning they became anti-racists at the same time. And then when you turn this on, the people become more religious, and they become, you basically say, more racist. The correct way of thinking would be more tribalistic, or more nationalist.
For in-group preference.
So this is a fucking big deal, because what you're seeing here is there's a brain structure that literally seems to modulate the core morality that we are legislating right now to put people in prison. That's a big deal, because that means that if you can stimulate a part of the brain to change somebody's morality, that's bizarre. That's crazy. How can we even say this is objective? These are big problems. Now, this is where things become even more fascinating. What does this part of your brain do? What's its role? Well, the prefrontal cortex is the thing that makes us human. We actually are quite similar to most animals in the back of our brain. Most animals actually have huge functional parts of their brain for vision, but the prefrontal cortex is the human part, this big thing that gives us our proud foreheads. And its job is problem solving, higher faculty, cognition, inhibition of other parts of the brain.
Suppression of emotion.
Discipline, will, exactly. So the posterior medial frontal cortex's job is to analyze reality and detect problems, detect danger and detect errors, and dedicate resources, or tell other parts of the brain to dedicate resources to do it. So the analogy I use is Sauron. It's the eye of Sauron. It doesn't have any hands. It can't do anything itself, but it sits up here and it looks for problems. And when it sees one, it tells the orcs to go and solve the problem in the back of your brain. Now, maybe that's making your brain seem evil, but it's just a handy thing. So this is called the threat processing, the threat detection, threat processing, or problem processing part of your mind.
Yeah.
Now, when this is turned on, you become more godly and more racist. When it's turned off, you become atheist and atheist and open to foreigners, this type of thing. This is really bizarre, because this is actually very similar to the psychological pattern I was just describing. The original God of the Israelites was a godly, hyper-religious, you could say super fascist race tribe of chosen people attacking the world, establishing themselves. This sounds like the same psychology of firing threat detection center. Then as they urbanize, they become a sort of God flies off into the distance, almost like disbelieving atheists in a way, and obviously open. It universalizes, it becomes open to everybody. Now, what is happening here? Well, it seems like this threat detection center is in nature, and it's like looking for tigers and fucking demons and all this, and like and it's going to die at any moment. And so it's firing in all cylinders, and it's observing this stuff. And then when you get into the urban city, you don't have to deal with tigers all day. You have police forces, you have air conditioning. And so it begins to weaken. It stops functioning as much. And naturally, you start to develop atheism and openness and tolerance, this type of thing. And this is crazy, because we have a foundation of like moral psychology that is hyper emotional for people, that is just revealing itself inside of our brains. It's like very simple brain patterns. Well, maybe not simple, but like, it's in our heads, it's in our neuroscience. So when you come across a Christian now, a right-wing Christian, they will tell you that they're Christian, but it really seems like what unites us all is that all of us have our threat detection center firing back on. And so us Nietzscheans, us pagans, us Christians, we're all the ones saying our race tribe, which is the West, is we all realize we're under threat, because we're seeing all these strangers come in. We're getting radicalized by social media, where we're seeing the people get killed in the streets. We're seeing the, England, the Muslim rape gangs and all this. That's stimulating our threat detection center. So the libtards are all the atheists who don't perceive threats, who live in their gated white communities where they're 97% white. Mm-hmm. They don't have to deal with any problems, and they don't feel any threats. And so they become atheists and open, because that's what is functional then. Now, all of us are radicalizing ourselves with our phones, and then we're all turning on, and then we develop race tribalism. And this is actually also tied to belief too. And so you see, I speak to pagans all the time who are they have their own version of this. They'll be like, I believe in Wotan, the collective oversoul. I believe in fucking Danga or Jupiter or something like this. And then you'll get people who are like hardcore Christian and Catholic. And then you even get this in specific senses. I mean, like in Ireland, I meet people who have this threat detection center on all the time.
Yeah.
And they're all Catholic, and they all think Protestantism is a delusion. delusion. I've met guys who are Orthodox Christian now, because they're attaching to religious belief, because it's tribalism, religious belief, this type of thing. It's all forming together. So I think in a meta perspective, this is actually more closer to reality. And people getting caught up in the bickering are completely missing the point. Because you go into Christianity and you will find plenty of people with this turned on, but you'll find far more people with this turned off, who are still God is love, God lives in heaven, God wants everybody to be open to everything. So Christians coming and saying like, it's all about, it's like you have to introspect or self-reflect on what the institution actually is right now. You'll see that the thing that unites us is that we tend to be a smaller minority, but we're all united by I guess you could call it tribalism in some sense. And that's the first principle, I think.
Yeah. I mean, this is a very interesting connection that you're making with the threat detection system. I think it's, I mean, I've never heard anyone actually bring this up before. And I'd be curious to actually find out if that was how correlated that is with belief that neuronal activity. But it seems plausible to me that yes, what you have is like you have certain people that for maybe because of things that happened to them growing up, or like you said, a lot of the young people, they just get radicalized by social media, or they just look around, or temperament, or whatever it may be. Seem to be realizing like, hey, the reality that we're living in is not so sanguine and halcyon as we like to make it seem. And actually it's like somewhat fragile. Like the civilization that's around us is not as sturdy as it may seem. And I think what's interesting is that there's a counterpoint that people would make to this, which is like, oh, well, look at these guys. The only reason they are a right wing or they're against foreigners or whatever is because they're afraid. They're afraid. They're pussies, basically. They'll say that, you don't, this comes up in the labor market all the time. It's like, oh, you don't like immigration. It's because you just don't want to compete. It's because you can't compete. And it's like, what's so interesting about that point of view is that what they don't realize, they're projecting their own their own boundaryless altruism onto others, onto people that are not themselves. Mm-hmm. What they don't realize is that the people that are outside of them don't share their beliefs, and definitely don't share their sense of altruism. Mm-hmm. Like those other individuals, outsiders, aliens, whatever you want to call them, are also self-interested.
They're all race tribes.
Yeah, right. They all are. And so that's the part that you're missing. And so really, I like this framework because what you're saying is that the people who don't have this sense of like tribal affiliation are simply not getting the right feedback from reality. They're not interfacing with it properly, which I think is interesting if you think about the types of individuals who have especially become sort of outspoken in the last 5 years. You had famously the gym bros opposing COVID, the lockdowns, right? And then you've got individuals like, in your country of Ireland, you've got, of course, Conor McGregor, which everyone knows about, coming out and really taking a stand for his country, doing something extremely patriotic and trying to put a stop to things and using his fame to try to do that. Well, this is an individual who's a fighter, right? His entire job is to be completely as close as possible in touch with the feedback from his reality, because if he's not there, he gets knocked in the head and he might die. Mm-hmm. And that's his job. And so there's no room in someone like that's worldview to block reality out, to not see it for what it is, because their entire livelihood and survival even is dependent on getting as close to the state of ground reality as possible at all times.
So this is a brilliant point, really astute observation, because this is actually leading into what I'm saying. And again, this is quite heretical to Nietzsche, what I'm saying, because I'm pointing out that when you come in contact with reality and you face danger, you become more tribalistic, nationalist. You become more like in-group preferring. At the same time, you also become more religious. Conor McGregor is the perfect example. Conor McGregor used to make jokes about Jesus about 10 years ago. And now, as he's gotten more red-pilled and race-conscious, if you will, but he's always been like, he's always loved the Irish, but like as he's become more tribalistic, He's also become more religious. He's also become like he's more. He talks about God more. These two things fired on at the same time. As he processed threats, belief and this went up. And if you think about it, you're contacting reality, and you're around danger all the time, and you're faced with death. You're faced with something could go wrong, and so you're going to do two things at once. You're going to be like, who's my team? And who, like, is there a purpose to is there a destiny to my life? You interface with reality and you come in contact with the divine, the question.
Yeah.
So that's a fascinating thing. And this, again, is like Nietzsche's core, one of Nietzsche's core thesis that, again, I bend a little bit, but it is him, Nietzsche, saying, like, the fundamental psychological disposition is, do you have the strength to affirm life versus to deny life? Because what does he often say? That he noticed this psychology inside of people where you have these people called life deniers, where they come in contact reality and it hurts too much. They're not strong enough to deal with reality. It's too painful. They don't have the will to try to solve their problems. So they contact reality like the libtard does. And it hurts. It stings them. It traumatizes them. And it's a very natural thing. We've all been there. Like, life can really fucking hit you hard in the face at times. And what do you do then? If it hurts too much and you don't want to go back and face it again, you try to escape. You try to deny. You turn on life. And like, think about this in fairly and seriously. Say you get raped, or say you get like robbed, or say like all your parents get shot, or something like this. It's very easy for you to black pill and be like, the world is evil, go Schopenhauer mode, and turn on life. And then what happens when you turn on life? You need to escape life. And then what do? You do what Schopenhauer does. You do what a Gnostic does. You do what a Christian might do, which is you say, this world itself is a samsara of violence and death. Reality is evil. Reality is bad. And this is where you see the psychology of the life-denying Gnostic Schopenhauer show up. This whole reality is just constantly killing animals, and so we can eat, so I can go to work, so I can gain status, so I can try fuck some stupid bitch, so I can create killed children. And it's just like this endless, so that those children can grow up to eat me and do the same thing. It's in this endless cycle of pain and suffering with no point. And you become jaded. So what do? You try to escape. You try to deny. You say life is bad, and you try to escape. And this forms the psychological idea of going into, there's a heaven far off in outer space that is perfect.
Yeah.
Where God created his kingdom of heaven and everybody loves everybody there. And
where I'll finally get relief from all these pressures.
And this is like, my soul is trapped in this fallen vessel, which is my body, which is attached to this world, and I need to get out of it. And once you start to see that, a lot of things begin to click. Think, for example, of the woke. Like, this is the psychology of the woke. My soul identifies as something that nature made incorrect. Nature assigned me these testicles or this vagina or these tits, and they're wrong. My soul is something else. My soul is not from this world. My soul is a different thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to war against my body and reforge it and use the power of my soul and my imagination to fix it, to redeem life.
Reshape matter.
Reshape matter.
Into its, the matter that we're born into is malformed. This is a demiurgic concept.
Exactly. And then think about this in terms of the European cookery, It's like, it is the same concept. It's obviously maybe a more like tempered, down-to-earth terms, but this idea that like my instincts for nationalism, my instincts for belief, my instincts to produce children, my instincts to assert my culture and project it around the world, these are all deep symbols of evil because they engage with life. Life wants me to be a nationalist. Life wants me to create loads of children. Life wants me to project my culture around the world. Life wants me to be aggressive. And therefore, since life is evil, all of these things are evil. So I must do the opposite. This is the boomer, I must do the opposite. Psychologically, I must take out my own nation. I must destroy the world. I must do something completely unnatural and sacrifice all my civilization in order to, just prove that I'm worthy of the kingdom of heaven. The atheist boomer can act exactly like this. And he's a Gnostic at war with reality who hates reality. And this is the psychology that you see here. You stretch this all the way back to Christianity, all the way back to even non-Christian movements. Buddhism, Schopenhauer. You can find it all over the place. This is life denying, You see it in many early Gnostics. This is like an archetype where you have these guys called like the Valesians, for example, and these are a castration cult. They cut all their own testicles off because they believe that sexuality binds us to samsara, and samsara is evil. So they cut their balls off. When people would visit them, friends would visit them, they would get them like Fight Club and cut their balls off. They would find travelers in the road and castrate them because they believed that they were ending the cycle of suffering and helping people escape by sterilizing them. And the first canon of the Nicene Creed, where Constantine was there, where they made the Catholic Church. What's the first canon of the Nicene Creed? You'd imagine it's about I love God or something like that.
What is it?
The first canon of the Nicene Creed is saying that if someone castrates themselves, they cannot be in the church. The first thing they brought up in the minutes of the meeting.
They're like, by the way, guys, you got to start with this.
Literally. And you read it and it's like, look, if the barbarians castrate him, it's obviously not that him doing it to himself. But if he castrates himself, there's too much of this going on. Gnosticism was that prominent in this early movement because that's what the feeling that you get is like, we need to escape reality and deny life. And that's the morality of life hate. And then the opposite of life affirmation is, all your instincts fire on. Your instincts are good. Engaging with samsara is good. This is the Nietzschean perspective, if you so will. And it's a total moral revolution. And weirdly, you can find it in the Bible. You can find it in the God of Israel. You find it in European Christianity. They take it, they digest, the Catholic Church comes in, stamps out Gnosticism, digests Christianity into this like Platonic, life-affirming religion of violence and nationalism that fights Muslims. That's what it turns into.
Yeah.
And that's why when people go to the church, they interface with it and they're like, it can be very based. And they're correct. There's loads of baseness in Christianity because of this tendency towards this. But I don't think it's getting to the philosophical principles, which is what I'm trying to outline here.
So I want to then move this forward, like into what to do, right? Because one of the things that personally I lament and I think about it a lot is the decadence of our time, the decadence of our age, right? And it's ironic that we have this kind of weird moral inversion going on at the same time that there's a tremendous amount of decadence and degeneracy, right? You've got the weak times create weak men. We are definitely in that time, the time of weak men. And there's a version of this which says, like we're in the Kali Yuga, you need to ride the tiger. What is the Nietzschean position in this kind of a state? Because it's obvious that, like, yes, okay, it's fine to say we're going to embrace our natural instincts. We're not going to deny life. We're going to affirm that, yes, I want power and that's okay. That's good, actually. I have my own self-interest. I want to, make lots of money. I want to have success. I want lots of children. I want lots of sexual opportunities, whatever it may be, right? But that starts to very quickly delve into hedonism. So I want to ask you a little bit about what your view is on kind of counteracting that force, because there is a strong pull in our current society to just sort of distract yourself. Everyone's just swiping on their phones all day. I meet Zoomers all the time. It seems to me like they're all on drugs. There's no sexual mores really anymore. There's no rules around, conduct in relationships. Even basic loyalty is called into question in a lot of places. How do you think about this tension between getting rid of the yoke of this sort of life-denying moral system that we've been living under, and in trying to embrace a more life-affirming attitude towards the world without falling into hedonism and degeneracy?
Yeah, so there's a practical side of this, and also maybe more propagandistic or psychological warfare aspect of this, because there's a lot of forces that move into this. First of all, like, I like to focus on how us Europeans are doing this to ourselves. But like, there's obviously outside groups that actually take the exact same life-denying psychology and use it to batter them down, because it's very advantageous to them. Like, and people coming into the West, they want us to hate ourselves and remain open because it's very valuable to them. But at the root, it's coming from us. So you see these like practical demographic issues where like, the boomers are infected with this heavily, and it's very, very hard to change their minds unless we're all going to seize Fox News and CNN, and we're going to be able to, like, use the media to red pill them on all these things. It's just, that's never going to happen. So in some sense, you're weathering the storm. Actually, an analogy I like to use for this is ancient Rome, where in the 300 AD, the ancient Romans had what we call the final pagan generation, which is like just before Christianity took over. Rome was in the possession of pagans with maximum authority over the entire Roman state. And in that century, in a space of about like one generation, which is 30, 40 years, these Roman boomers had everything. They had like 1,000-year-old civilization, and they completely failed to pass it on to their children. And all these things went wrong, where they had a hippie movement, where they had loads of their children just abdicated their responsibility because they thought like Rome was too heavy and monstrous and evil. And they passed it on to Christians, and Christians just took over the state like this. It was really, really quick the way it happened. And there was all like a lot of sort of Christian revolutionaries. It actually looks very similar to our time, where the Roman boomers could not pass on the keys to the kingdom. They completely failed in that sort of hereditary thing. And if you look around in our culture, like that's a huge part of our problem, is that there's this really difficult capacity for us to get hereditary working, like this type of thing, this connection working.
Yeah.
In Ireland, for example, there's boomer landlords who are making 40 million a year off the refugee centers. And they're obviously just selling out the country for the sake of short-term cash.
Yeah.
And there's no connection to them. They can just go live in Spain and then they die, and that's their lives. And they have this really bizarre way of thinking where they're cashing in right at the end of their life to live a comfortable beach retirement, and that's it. So this is like an extremely toxic, self-destructive thing. But the problem is that they have all the power. They're getting all the money. And we millennials, we Zoomers, we just have to wait. We literally have to just like try our best to weather this and survive as much as we can until they die out in the next 5 years. Like 2030 is the pivot point where an awful lot of stuff happens. So in a practical sense, 2030 is where an awful lot of things have the opportunity to really forcefully change. And this is the dangerous thing. The Roman boomers failed. And so what happens is their children, they did not pass on the keys of the kingdom. Christians took power in about 380. And Theodosius then banned paganism forever in 391, which is inconceivable 70 years before.
Mm-hmm.
So the Christians took power at 391. They banned paganism completely. They eradicated the ancestral religion. So it was a total revolution. It was like if the woke managed to ban Christianity.
Right.
Like, can you imagine how crazy that would be if the woke actually took power and said all religions are mandated except for Christianity? Like, it'd be something like this. And then what happened? Rome falls 19 years later. So Rome falls in 410. They get conquered, and that's it. And that was the first time they're conquered in 1,000 years. So the arc of the Roman boomers is they own everything. Their generation, they live through it. Their children, they fail to take care of their children. A revolutionary spirit comes up, take over the state. It's almost like a quasi woke movement. I know some people get mad at me saying this. And then 19 years later, the barbarians come in and the violent men come in and they crush everything. And that's the end of Rome forever. And then Rome never comes back, and that's done. That's the end of Rome forever. It is a failure. The West is on the precipice of this. We are in the downgoing spiral, and that could definitely happen. And if you wanted to mitigate this, and it's possible to mitigate this, you need to understand this sort of situation and the stakes. So we're living with our Roman boomers. They're highly demoralized. We have all these cults, just like ancient Rome. We have Gnostic Christianity rising up. We have life denial rising up. It's heavy in the Romans. There's a lot of decadence in the Romans. The potential people who will harvest it will be the barbaric Goths, who have the race, tribal godliness firing on all cylinders. Maybe a Christian revolution is rising up as well. Who knows? But you're trying to bridge that divide. You're trying to say to yourself, right, these institutional boomers, loads of boomers have a good mindset and are healthy and want to do the right thing, but just don't know. And can you create that bridge? Can you find, like, this is a big problem for the Irish. There's actually a lot of Irish institutions, but none of them are connected to the Irish people. So we have to get someone like Conor McGregor, who's 36. People don't think about this. Conor McGregor's a millennial. He's 36 years old, and he's having to stand up against the entire boomer state. And he's not a perfect person, and he has to take all these risks in order to, like, try to put the foot down and prepare to temper the insanity of the boomers, because the boomers would they're not revolutionaries, you know? And so this is the big issue, is that we have like a lot of young guys are under 40 who are really understand the dire situation. And they're like, this is an unbelievably difficult problem. And so this is what's sort of happening is like, how do you bridge that gap? How do you mitigate as much damage by the boomers? Obviously now you need to put political pressure on them. When you find the good boomers, which there are many of, how do you connect with them? There's all these problems where like old institutions are literally just dying. And you need to, so I said about the Irish institutions, these networks are all there, but they're all dying because us millennials don't interface with institutions the way we used to. Here's another example of this. Religious belief is rising right now. They've measured it in the Zoomers. The Zoomers, especially the young Zoomers, are more religious than their boomers. They've broke the trend of gradual increases in atheism. They've broke that trend for the first time in nearly 100 years. Atheism peaked in 2018 in England. Atheism was still a minority perspective, and in England it became the majority in around about 2015, 2019, something like this. And that was like a giant uptrend. Atheism was growing and growing and growing and growing and growing, which is very similar to this threat detection center turning off. And now 2020, the middle of 2020, 2021 to 2023, belief began to just rocket up. But interestingly, that belief is not coming as institutional belief. Zoomers are not going back to church per se. It seems like the churches are actually getting weaker. Institutions are getting weaker, but belief is going up. Now that's fascinating because what's happening, it seems, is that the younger people have a new institution, which is this. This is the institution. And so they're interfacing with these psychological perspectives through this. And this is the problem. Boomers deal with institutions, Zoomers deal with the phone. And this is where all the new institutions are going to be. And this is how psychology is playing itself out now. And it's almost like our job is to bridge that and help the boomers understand that like their institutions are going to die. They need to figure out a way that they can bridge the gap with the TikTok generation. But the TikTok generation are actually ascendant in most of the healthy perspectives. There's like the contingents of the Zoomers believing is going up. The contingents of the Zoomers that are hard right is going up. Women under the age of 21, for the first time, probably fucking ever, women are going more right wing than they're going left wing. Like Zoomer women from the ages of 22 to 28 are massively left wing, but under 22, that's actually rising in women as well. That's a huge, that's a huge white pill. That's a huge white pill.
No one would have predicted that
No,
most of my lifetime.
Exactly, because threats and dangers stimulate this. You see all sorts of girls across the board. You see people all the time now in the Zoomers. It's Christianity and racism. That's like like that's what's showing up.
That's what the girlies are into.
Well, like I see it all the time. I see because like I noticed it from talking to girls that it really started to hit them after a while. They're just like, I don't want to get raped by a grooming gang.
Right.
And that's a terrifying prospect. That
if you're in Europe, yeah.
Like it's brutal. It's brutal, you know. And that's what like a lot of girls, it just hit them. They're like, there's no man is going to fight for me except for like my own tribe. You know, they started to realize that there's like, you know, the white guys, we give them so much hassle, but they're the ones that would white knight for us, that type of thing, you know. And that's it's true. It's really true. And they started to realize this, and they started to realize that they have their team, and that's switching on in people. That's natural health switching on in people, which is an interesting answer to the woman question, because it seems like they can experience these things switching on to get like a genuine perspective of health. So like all of this stuff is like coming together, and there's a lot of fertility, and there's a lot of unbelievable opportunities, and there's a grave danger where the life-denying cult does destroy Western civilization. Completely possible. Like the demographics in Europe are brutal. Demographics in America are brutal. It's really bad. And the culture in both of these places are extremely bad. But an awful lot of the trends are in our favor.
Yeah.
And it's like, can we cultivate them and allow those trends to blossom? Because like, you know, if we're representative of 15 to 20% of the population right now, it's just a tiny minority. But Christianity was like that at the start of the 300 AD. Do we blossom into being the complete authority in the world and enforce health? Like, you know, like I'm describing, is this an objective way to look at things? Or do we get into all this bickering saying like, is it like anti-paganism? Do we enforce like Christianity, and Christianity ends up cocked, and then we end up who knows? But there's a lot to be done. There's a lot of opportunity. There's ways that we can look at the situation and practically there's actually even timescales where I'm saying like 2030 where a lot of this stuff will hinge on and things like that. So I'm not sure if that's a good answer, but
Well, no, that was great. It's good that we're making content like this, where the Zoomers discover all along the way, and maybe some of the Boomers will who are sympathetic will figure that out pretty shortly.
yes.
Well, Uberboyo, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Not at all. Thank you.
Yes, and before I let you go, any last words for people about what to hope for the future?
Well, what I'm describing is a big hope. Like you have to understand an awful lot of the black pill feeling that we have, I don't think is the people attacking us, because it's not a problem being attacked. Actually being attacked can give your life meaning. The thing that's really breaks your soul is your own people being traitors. And I don't mean traitors as in like, actively working against you, but having this sort of like cuck traitorness, if you so will, like this sort of limp incapacity that you see. The experience that I have in Europe, because Europe's particularly bad for this, is all of our systems are populated by self-hating boomers who inhibit our capacity to act. I meet all these young men across Europe that are as brave and ready for it as the Americans, and the Americans are full of energy as well. And they all want to do stuff, but there's just this enormous system of inhibition that is enforced upon them. And if they try display nationalism or pride, or they try to get organized and connect with people, or they try to do something, the boomer regime comes in and just enforces inhibition upon them. And like I've seen experiences where there's been like young nationalists that try to set up MMA gyms, and the boomer regime comes in and finds them and charges them with hate speech. But then like there's like, a Muslim MMA network down the road, and they're of course allowed to do it because it's quirky and diverse and national. Right. And that's really brutal. That's a really brutal experience, because it's not like the outsider you're at war with that gives your life meaning. It's like, it's almost like you're possessed by a spiritual demon inside of your people.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm trying to describe, the psychological revolution. I think this is the core of it, is that like
it's a kind of spiritual warfare.
It's a psychological spiritual warfare. Absolutely. 100%. And again, I'm trying to bring all these frames of perspectives to this, where I'm even bringing up neuroscience, because I think the great strength that we have as intellectuals is that if we can really color this in a sophisticated way, it's very persuasive, because people feel instinctively that this is true. They're like, they do feel that there's a problem with immigration, if you so will, but the chuddish engagement bait version is not very, that's not a spiritual thing. That doesn't cover the spiritual paradigm of reality. And that actually does attract people who just are angry and just want to hate. But it's true, it's real. And then if you can color in all these extra perspectives, this is like forcefully persuasive to people. And this is what I mean. What's the white pill? There's all these Zoomers that are rising up now, that have felt that fear, that have felt the dread, that lived through the lockdowns, that see what's going on, that look at their horizon and realize there's nothing for me. There's nothing. There's no way. The boomers are going to sell them out, and there's no way they're going to have a good life. Their lives are fucked, and they feel that. And this is forcing the threat detection center to turn on and actually developing out of them the good traits. They're becoming godly, they're becoming faithful, they're becoming organized with the tribe. They're actually developing morality organically. I meet young Zoomer girls now, and they're instinctively rejecting sex culture because of what's going on, because it's disgusting. I've actually, you speak to them, it's very fascinating. They have a disgust towards just this engagement in the slop heap of free love, if you so will, which is it was crazy to me. I was like, what is going on? I thought all girls were hoes. Is that what the red pill is? This type of thing. So it seems like there is actually a break away from all of this. And so their energy is going up. And then if you can look at this and help them and say, like, your instincts are in the right place, any way that we can try connect all of this together, connect the best boomers, go against the dying boomers, connect the millennials who are all jaded, which have been in the trenches for like 7 years now, where like scars are all over the faces. Get these guys to like color in and paint pictures in people's minds. Give them a deeper reality that they can form a spiritual world perspective around, not just chuddish engagement bait, I hate Indians type thing.
Yeah.
But like actually show them like what I'm talking about. Like this is like
there's actually something good here for you, for your future. And it's not just good, but it's just.
Yes.
You know, it's not just, you're not just like impotently whining online.
Yeah.
Or hating people just to be edgy and get a rise out of, out of people.
Oh.
There's a real substance behind it.
100. I actually think this is why people go to Christianity, which is why I don't shut out against Christianity, counter-signal. A lot of people do. I don't think that's good, because people go to Christianity for a very clear reason, which is like they live in a fucking hellhole a lot of the time, or more specifically, they live in a mental hellhole.
Yeah.
Because there is all this negativity coming in, and there's all this demoralization. And so you go to Christianity and it gives you this like enormous, deep, 1,000-year world perspective that is sophisticated and psychologically speaks to you. And Christ is an incredibly profound figure. And it's really deep and really emotive and really moving. And that's crucial. And then you look at like the opposite, which is like, oh, you're going to get into just chud racism.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that give you? You know, you can't achieve anything.
It's just a version of nihilism.
It is. It literally is. And so, but this is the thing, is that like these things, first of all, don't need to be at odds.
Yeah.
And they also don't need to be simple, stupid chud stuff. I'm trying to point out that there's like profoundly neuroscientific basis for this, which is crazy. So you can develop a rich world perspective on all of this stuff that is, like, if that's there, that lifts up these guys who have this instinct. And if you connect that with the guys with the instinct, it's over, it's done, you've won the game. You can make that happen. So get this world perspective, marry it to the guys who have instinct, and get those guys active in culture, politics, whatever it is, business, whatever it is. If all those things click, I think we turn this whole thing around within a generation, 100%.
Well, Uberboyo, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you very much, my man. Thank you for taking the time.